Bonjour à toutes et à tous. On est là pour parler de l'espace politique européen. Bonjour. Alors, c'est suite à ma soutenance. En fait, je soutenir ici en Sorbonne. C'était une thèse sur la phénoménologie de l'espace politique. On a pensé d'organiser, comme il y avait des politiciens et des philosophes qui étaient déjà là à Paris, d'organiser cette Agora. Et ce serait une occasion pour parler de l'espace politique européen, mais surtout du futur des gauches à l'intérieur de l'espace politique européen et des conceptions qu'on peut avoir dès l'Europe et des conceptions qu'on peut avoir en fait de l'action que la gauche, ou voire les gauches françaises, surtout italiennes et anglaises, peuvent avoir dans la constitution, dans l'institution de l'espace politique européen. L'idée serait plutôt celle de faire un débat qui pourrait continuer dans d'autres agoras, avec des philosophes, avec des politiciens, avec des théoristes, des théories de la politique et des sociologues, etc. Du coup, quelque chose qui ne doit pas être exactement académique, mais plutôt ouvert à toute la citoyenneté, en particulier en ces moments où on est un peu perdu par rapport à les gauches en Europe et surtout en Italie et en France en ces moments. On l'a appelé Agora, surtout pour lui donner un caractère public qui ne doit pas être forcément académique, même partitique, en fait, relié à un parti particulier. Ce serait plutôt une sorte des rencontres avec l'entièreté de la citoyenneté pour parler du futur de l'espace politique européen. Et je commencerai par donner la parole à M. Etienne Balibar. Après, on va passer, on peut dire, à l'Italie avec Oddoni et Panzeri. Et après, on va passer à l'Angleterre avec Luc Cooper et Andrea Pizarro. Et après cela, après ces toutes petites interventions, on va parler aussi avec Nadia Urbinati, qui est professeure à Columbia, qui nous rejoint via Skype. Et après, on pourra ouvrir le débat. On a choisi des mots, des keywords, de mots-clés pour ouvrir le débat avec vous tous et vous toutes. Et c'est ça. Alors, je commencerai par donner la parole à Etienne Balibar, qui n'a pas vraiment besoin d'une introduction, mais en tout cas, il est un philosophe exceptionnel, un expert du marxisme, des marxismes, et il est professeur émérite ici, à Paris 10, à l'Inter, mais il est aussi Anniversary Chair Professor au Centre of Research in Modern European Philosophy, Kingston University, so à Londres.
The problem is, I have to confess that I haven't read the book, you know.
But that's perfect.
Because I did receive a PDF, but this is a terrible moment for me. I had to, not only because I had to read Katerina's remarkable thesis, there were other commitments as well. So I'm in a terrible hurry about everything.
I think we can, without entering in the topic of the book, which is a kind of glossary of the main words that the new left, the left in the hopefully situation of rebirth should use, from liberty, memory, market. So we know that this is the issue today. So we can start from the fact that he proposed this kind of approach to go back to organizing the left.
Okay, as moderator, please, one of you can start. I don't know who of you.
I will start. This will be very preliminary, and this will be short. How long do you give me? 10 minutes?
10-15 would be amazing.
10-15 minutes. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. And first of all, I want to congratulate Katerina, not only because she's now a doctor in political philosophy and phenomenology and European metaphysics and many other things, with after a very brilliant defense yesterday. But coming more directly to today's topic, because I'm full of admiration for you, Katerina. I want to say how important I find it that young intellectuals like you, with a training in philosophy and experience of studying in different countries, are now able, I would say, to seize, to become protagonists and take such initiatives and gather many different people from different countries to discuss the issue of Europe. The situation in Europe is extremely bad. I think many of us will agree on that. It's bad in Europe in general. It's bad in each and every European country with different of course, forms and aspects, but there are nevertheless elements of hope, however tiny they are. Can you hear me, Nadia, or not? No, she doesn't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. And so, among these elements, of course, is the fact that in your generation, and this is not only due to institutional structures, the fact that there is Erasmus, that you travel from one country to another to complete your courses. I think there is a genuine commitment. There is a friend and colleague here from Czechoslovakia where you have studied. There are Italians, there are French, there are British friends and colleagues, and probably others as well, virtually at least. And please, be courageous, keep working like that. And the oldies like me and others will do their best to side with you because it's in your hands. I mean, your generation, the future of Europe. Okay, so unfortunately, I haven't yet read the book, which I'm sure is very interesting and useful document and instrument of reflection and discussion. I'm sure this will come later in the discussion. You will give us an idea of what we can find there. I came with the idea of addressing extremely quickly and, of course, abstractly or summarily, I would say, 3 points which are absolutely not complete. I do not pretend that these are the only points that we should discuss. They came to my mind as especially relevant in the moment. So, first has to do with crossing successive thresholds of the institutional crisis of the European construction. And of course, the last elections in Italy, followed by the vicissitudes which are now leading to the constitution or the announced constitution, because you will say, but we were not even sure that this is really the end of this transition period, and what might come after is probably not much more secure. But this last episode only adds another element. The second point on which I want to insist, but of course it follows rather naturally from the first, has to do with the importance of the question of migrants, refugees. There's now a new terminology in France that you may have seen, particularly among members of NGOs and more militant organizations who work with the migrants. You should no longer say migrants or refugees. You should say exiles, but well, that's part of the discussion. And the third point, I hope to get there in time, is about not only the vital importance of the question of democracy more than ever, but of course, in a sense, I'm pushed in that direction by the conversations we had with Caterina and the points that she makes in her thesis. It's about the uneasy balance, I would say, of the different, and of course the fact that we have here Nadia Obinati, who is one of the great experts and thinkers on these issues internationally in the last period, adds to the interest of raising that question. So the uneasy balance, I would say, of different forms of democracy or democratization of political institution in the political space and why, in fact, I personally do not think that we can give up any of these dimensions, including, I will insist on that, the representative dimension. Okay, so on the first point, very quickly, I think that what we observe, and there are different terminologies that are now kind of common good and used on every side, not only on the left, also on the right, about the situation of Europe is a category borrowed from Gramsci, the interregnum that Zygmunt Bauman first used a couple of years ago, and then I did myself recur to that to describe the situation, and now it's a kind of commonplace. So the problem is not to diagnose an interregnum that is a situation of crisis in which, as Gramsci famously explained, the old is dying or is already dead, in a sense, whereas the new or the future is not yet really born. And therefore, of course, everybody, every institution, every social group, every ideological movement or force finds themselves in a state of disarray, which can lead to the most absurd and destructive, in a sense, effects. But it's also a question of assessing, I would say, describing as closely, as precisely as possible, the stages, if you like, or the development in which we find ourselves. And of course, this is not very. This doesn't lead to very optimistic considerations. So I used some time ago the formula: each and every nation state or single member state of the European Union is now becoming ungovernable one after the other. Now, of course, there are different modalities of non-governability, I would say, and they cannot be put all exactly in the same basket. They don't have the same causes. They don't produce exactly the same effects. But I believe that the situation is general. Now, of course, what happened recently in Germany, and the important point is that this is not only taking place in so-called peripheral member states or countries. If ever that distinction had any relevance in terms of political dynamic in Europe, I believe that it is losing that relevance very rapidly. I no longer see, in fact, the point in describing the European construction as something like a kind of strong core, a group of core states in the middle, only to periodically lament the fact that the French and the German, who are supposed to be the leading states because of their economic power, their political strength, etc., are not exactly working together or on the same line, as if the only important thing was or were this agreement, etc., which is also underlying, I know I skipped many intermediaries, the ideology of, I must say it in German, of Kern-Europa, of the core Europe, which interestingly, of course, is used or periodically proposed as a kind of miracle instrument, if you like. If we cannot build Europe, we'll build the core of Europe, and the others will remain the periphery. So this was initially proposed by right-wing German politicians. Then it was adopted by nobody else than Jürgen Habermas, which can be criticized on many accounts, but he's certainly not right-wing. And then it was taken up by Macron in his last attempt at showing, I would say, the grand way towards the resurrection of the European Union when he was elected, something that now seems almost surrealistic. And in fact, okay. So I think that the crisis of governability is everywhere, but is, of course, taking different aspects. It was there in Spain. This is a very important element. And the case, and it is still there, more than ever, of course, around the issue of independence or autonomy of Catalonia and the way in which the central government itself threatened with collapsing because of corruption and things like that, tried to master it. One element which I, together with others, I don't remember if Nadia was with us, but a number of European intellectuals on the left from different countries signed a petition which perhaps was not perfect at the beginning, where we explained that this was a European issue, and that in particular the idea, whether or not we agreed with the idea of the independence of Catalonia, and personally I'm not a great fan of that, but the idea that Europe as such should act as a mediating force, or should play a role in the resolution of this crisis was the central idea. And of course, the exact opposite happened. Everybody agreed that this should not take place. So I take this. I will stop there. I take this as an indication of the fact that, with all due differences between the national situations, the crisis of governability that we are now observing are always results of forces, if you like, or processes which are taking place at both ends of the political spectrum. They are not purely nationally grounded. The situation in Italy, on which I hope we are going to talk now, is not purely the result of the specific history of Italy, the particular corruption or idiocy of the Italian political class, even if that is true. I mean, etc. Europe as such has an enormous responsibility in that. And this point is important for a number of reasons, because, of course, that means that the institutional crisis is progressing from both sides, and therefore it's only in a completely virtual manner, and I admit utopian formula, that we can imagine a solution. The solution should involve at the same time profound transformations in the social and political structure of each member state, addressing locally such issues as the rise of neo-fascist movements and so on, and a complete transformation, of course, of the European Union as such, with or without inevitably with new treatises at some point. This point is important because, and here, of course, not everybody will agree with me, I believe, I have in mind the apparent exception of France. I do believe that many of the French voters who elected Macron, and especially after electing Macron, that was a minority of voters, but after electing Macron, elected the parliament or the the rump parliament, I would say, in using very old terminology from British history, that we have now in France, and which is not a parliament. I mean, it's not playing that role any longer, or very superficially. So that was a relative majority of French voters. That included, so you might say that they were fooled, that one of the reasons I believe, and that's of course a kind of imaginary reconstruction of the situation, is that came to my mind after the Italian elections, is they wanted, in a sense, to avoid a kind of Italian type situation. That is, they wanted a government in France. They didn't want a situation in which you would have, etc. Okay. So I already exhausted all my time probably, but I just mentioned the other two. Okay. So the question of migrants, refugees, I believe, is not the only question, but it's really a guiding thread, and it's a crucial issue. And I give only two or three quick indications on that side. First, going back to the Italian situation and therefore anticipating the discussion that we'll have, there seems to be something incredible and almost monstrous, in a sense, and politically speaking, in the political agreement between the La Liga e Cinque Stelle. Because if you ask what kind of common program of government they could have, so I hope that more will come in the discussion, there seem to be only two points, which are both, of course, entirely negative. One of them is rejecting the current, say, governance of Europe in matters of budgets and finance. And the other one is, in fact, explicitly and vocally calling for an extremely brutal anti-immigrant turn in Italy. Not only, of course, creating what Theresa May and Amber and her minister had called a hostile environment for the migrants, but extremely harsh repressive measures, expulsions by the hundreds of thousands, which are probably impossible to carry on in any effective, technologically speaking, effective and above all decent or civil manner. Therefore, will be violent, and if they are implemented, and will also probably push and develop the racist attitudes and even initiatives of right-wing and, in fact, neo-fascist groups in the population itself. So I'm very, very worried about that. But if you return to the genesis, of that, and we're not going to explain what everybody here knows, that is the full story of the so-called refugee and migrant crisis in the last 2 years. It's absolutely clear for me not only that Europe as such failed and completely collapsed on this key issue, which belongs entirely to the common governance, to organize, I would say, try and organize at least the distribution and and help, to the migrants and the refugees all over Europe. But which has had in particular very bad consequences in Germany for the reasons that you know, because Merkel perhaps didn't use the best method, but she was absolutely right on the essential. And one of the big, I have to say this as a French citizen, one of the great culprits or responsible for that is France. I mean, France has played since the very beginning the most disgusting and disingenuous and dishonest role. All the governments, one after the other, they had one language, which was the language of solidarity, and one practice, which was the practice of absolute brutality on the hostile environment we have in France on the ground, and a complete lack of solidarity with other European governments. So that when the Italians say, whatever their political color, and the Greeks could say the same, etc. Of course, when the Italians say we had to carry the whole burden of welcoming the refugees, France closed their borders. They are right. I mean, they are right, and this is not going to help. And the third and last point, if I so I'll be very very quick, is about democracy. I mean, I of course maintained, and I think others did say the same, perhaps with a slightly different terminology, that not only that the European construction could not continue very long against the will or the inclinations, I would say, or the consent of its own peoples and citizens and populations. One of our young students, you know Aliénor Ballanger, is she a friend of yours? No, she also took a PhD a few weeks ago at Sciences Po on this question with a beautiful but terrible formula. Europe, or the European Union, or construction, from a union without the people to a union against the will or of their people. And of course, this had to be clarified. But the reason, what I maintained was, of course, that there would be, in the end, at some point, no legitimacy for any system of government, federal or quasi-federal, or but in any case involving a shift, I would say, of sovereignty from nation states to the European construction as such, if the European construction did not appear, and substantially so, of course, to the European citizen as a progress or as adding new dimensions, I would say, to the democratic governance and the democratic tradition itself. Now, of course, the articulation of legitimacy and democracy, and here Nadia will probably have much to say and will speak better than me, is always a complex and, in a sense, conflictual articulation. It is not the case, at least for anybody who, like some of us, has read Max Weber and is a little bit of a realist and not purely idealist in political matters. It is not the case that legitimacy cannot be based on anything else than democracy or democratic progress. What we see in France today is very clear in this respect. It's a clear attempt at creating or recreating a form of legitimacy for the existing government on a basis that is not democratic, that is technocratic, that is so-called output legitimacy or something like that. Whether it works or not, that's another point. So I'm aware of that difficulty, but the difficulty is even greater in a sense because there are different dimensions of democracy, and not all of them, of course, are equally well compatible with I'd say statist or post-statist institutions. One element of democracy which has to do with the development of social and political conflicts is, of course, hard to reconcile. Participatory democracy is hard to reconcile. The one that seems to be easier to reconcile is representative democracy, and I want to open the discussion on that because what I think is representative democracy is in one of its worst crises in the history of modern political institutions in each and every nation state. Yeah? And at the European level, it is practically inexistent, or it is very tiny and fragile and limited. I came to the idea, which I would not have always defended, which is largely also Habermas's idea, that in fact it is essentially at the level of Europe that it would be necessary and vital to increase the degree of representativity, the capacity of representation of citizens in the current situation. And in a sense, Habermas had a formula which, after all, I think is very deep. He said, we can compare to the origins of the American United States Republic, when the motto was no taxes, no taxpayers who are not also voters and citizens. And he said we should apply that to Europe. Taxes regulated at the European level, but also, of course, representation, and we must invent a good system for that, which balances individual and national. I think he's right. And I believe that this should be one of our mottos, and it would be resisted a left motto. I mean, almost like, if you like, in the early 19th century, when in Britain, in England rather, at the time, the People's Charter, in France, in Germany, in other places, the motto was universal suffrage. An equivalent must and can be found for Europe today. It's a left motto. And it will be resisted, of course, extremely strongly by all sorts of adversaries. We know that, both national and Brussels technocrats and so on. I apologize for speaking too long.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Yes, I'm going to be here. Thanks, Etienne. And so I'm going to switch to English, as everyone is speaking in English, I guess. And I would like to... Nadia, can you hear me? Yes? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I would like to Nadia to continue. And so Nadia Urbinat is a professor of politics at Columbia University. She published a book Etienne was referring to called Representative Democracy. She also worked on liberalism and representation, other forms of non-liberal governments. So I think that the possible questions coming from what Etienne said are, if you can open on the Italian situation, of course, but also the national dimension vis-a-vis the international, more European dimension, and the crisis of representativity, especially on the EU level, and also if you want to refer to Simone Oggioni's book, of course, what could be the words, the central words to rebuild somehow or reinstitute the European space on both the level of national and international dimension. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much to everybody to have me here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So then let me continue on the same line as Etienne, because in thinking about not only Italy but many other countries in Europe, it seems to me that there is a crossing, cross connections between Europe as a project, the decline of leftist parties, and the increasing popularity of nationalistic and sometimes even xenophobic parties instead, and government. So I think that the three elements should be conceived or analyzed together, because what the single nation state or member state in Europe are facing is precisely a reaction, the way in which they react against an evolution of Europe that they consider inimical, unfriendly, challenging, to say smoothly, to their own the national interest. So the growth of the right wing is connected to the European project. And so the European Union does, it's the terrain willing, whether we like it or not, it is the terrain for politics in all our countries, both in the right wing and in the leftist domain. Because the transformation that democracy is facing in each state is directly connected to how Europe was or wasn't capable of dealing with many promises that the European Union made since its inception. So it seems to me that we should try mentally at least to keep together these three elements. Right-wing, leftist, that is national transformation of democracies, and Europe. Thus, today it seems that Europe is also the terrain of different interpretations of Europe. So if you take the nationalistic or the populistic nationalistic movements which were able to score so much and even to achieve government power, like in Italy recently, you may see that they, all of them, from Poland to Austria to Hungary to Italy to all of them, they want to stay on the terrain of Europe. They don't want to go back to the pre-European order, EU order. So what they want to do, it is to redesign Europe in relation to some visions of their national communities. And the visions are based on exclusion of those who are not part of the large nation in one way or another, exclusion of the immigrants, closing doors, if you want to say so, and on the other hand, a transformation of Europe, because Europe should have a mission. If I read several speeches by Orban, and it's not the only one, the mission is to create an ethical vision of Europe in which religion and Christianity is central. And this is also true in those countries like Italy or France, which are more secular, and yet they use the argument of religion against another religion as a struggle between civilization in order to make their case. So today Europe is thus the terrain. And in my view, it is also the terrain in which we can measure the decline, somehow the failure, and in some cases like Italy, the disappearance, true disappearance of the left. And because the European Union we cultivated as a model in our mind and in our generation, it was truly connected to the construction of a solidaristic vision, capable of combining together, capable alla Spinelli to put together the issue of freedom or the civil liberty of circulation or simply interaction and the solidarity connected to a decent social life with the political social power and thus social rights. So that kind of Europe, which was truly envisioned in beginning with the 50s, this one was also connected to the stabilization of social democratic kind of movements of parties inside of each country. Now, these parties, and the case of Italy, but also the case of France and somehow, is paradigmatic because the decline of that kind of Europe, the Europe of inclusion, is going together with the failure of the left. So the two are together, as they are together, the nationalistic interpretation of Europe along with the nationalistic transformation of the nation state or several important member states. So paradoxically today, we are witnessing a situation that for me is frightening, because whereas the ambition of the enlargement of Europe, Prodi, was to expand through the incentive and through the politics of investment, to expand democracy and the rule of law, now we see that toward the East, now we see that the East is coming and shaping many governments and political movements in the West. So the movement now is the opposite, not only from the West to the East, but from the East to the West. And in this case, the East is not the East of class struggle or any kind of such an ideology of the 20th century, but it is an East connected to a difficult transition to democracy, nationalistic sovereign people or sovereignty, capable of now, because of the crisis, because of the economic crisis and the crisis of the borders of migration, to connect all of these inside of a project that is totally inimical to the way in which Europe, the European Union, was born and shaped. This is where we are now today. And thus all the difficulties we experience inside of our states are a mirror, a reflection of the difficulty of Europe. So this is a kind of twin destiny between these two entities, national and supranational. This is one point. The other point that I like to make has to do, and this is connected to the book in some sense, with the tragedy of the disappearance of the left, not as an idea of the few intellectuals, scholars, young people, not of the few, but as a project capable of being accepted with support by many people, ordinary citizens. Now instead the left, the name itself is in disgrace, because not only the Liga Nord kind of people or the urban people, these nationalists are critical of the establishment created by the left, but also less nationalistic, like the Five Stars movement, although the Five Stars movement is closer to our position because several of us voted for, or many people voted from the left for the Five Star movement. However, also them, they attribute to the left the becoming of the establishment supporting Brussels, supporting the technocrats in Brussels. So there is this accusation that is from different perspectives, which is very appealing to many, because it's connected to a situation of difficulty in economic sense, in social sense, but difficulty also because of the transformation of democracy and thus the decline of party form of politics. We have movements instead of parties. We have forms of quasi-direct connections between parliaments and the city, so-called the citizens through the web. We have this kind of tension toward different forms of politics, and the left, which through the 20th century became connected to the structural form, organizational form of a party, is seen as no longer functional to this new transformation of democracy. In fact, as an example of the old guard and the old forms of democracy connected to an oligarchical structure of party politics. So there is this important issue made in the name of more democracy, not in the name of less, in the name of a more genuine democracy, not less. And thus the attack toward the left is truly dramatic because the left was always connected to parties. And this is the situation we are here in Italy, but it's not only in Italy. In Italy, the situation is extreme, but it's not the only one. Now, what to do? Really, what to do? Because it is an issue that is an exquisite political question, this one. It's not simply a question of analysis. We can convene, we can be in agreement with the analysis more or less. But the question is what to do in this situation. And now this book, Le parole rubate, the words that have been stolen, try to retrieve the words of the left with new meaning in connections to this new reality I was describing along with Etienne. It was now. I don't want to enter in the question of the book whether I would agree or disagree, but certainly the issue is posed. The issue is the following also. It is an hegemonic turning point, this one, because the words the left used to be proud of and to diffuse through the citizenry, those words either have been stolen by other movements which are actually anti-left, or they have been transformed and thus deprived of their leftist meaning from inside of the left itself. So we are like wordless. We are like without the right words. So it is thus a question not simply of organizational intervenium or institutional intervenium. This is a cultural change, radical in my view, because we don't have, at least we, I use the word we because I identify myself with the left, not simply with democracy. We have really the hard time of structuring our analysis and political actions around keywords which are not simply words. They are promises, analysis and proposals for a society that is based on those principles of inclusion, solidarity, and equal dignity of human beings, based on a redistribution condition for a kind of democracy that is not simply a voting machinery. So this is my anguish. I really feel in a mood that is not totally pessimistic. I don't think that for now, in this moment, we have the strength that we would need to mark a change at the European level, because each left inside of each country is under trial. It is in a moment of anguish, even in those countries like Greece, potentially Spain, but they are so much stressed in their government and activity into doing a kind of politics that is at the end of the day preparing for their own defeat, because they cannot deliver what the leftists can promise. So they are in a situation, even in those less difficult countries, in a situation of great difficulty. So the what to do and where to start is for me an issue that needs to be is a political, is a genuine political question for intellectuals, for citizens, and for those who study politics, starting by refounding, reorganizing the left, reorganizing the language, reorganizing the way in which people meet, because now with the question of internet and meeting through the web, even personal relations, the capability of using language to dialogue, to convince, to read, is something that the left was the instrument, this was the instrument of the left. They are no longer there because people don't do anymore. So we are really in a moment of great change, truly great change. And in between the new and the old, this morbid situation sometimes can emerge that is suffocating us.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadia. Okay, so if you can stay with us until 7:15, you said?
Yeah, 7:15.
Okay, so I would like, first of all, Antonio Panzeri to speak, then maybe Simone or Johnny too, and then we can open maybe a little bit of discussion, at least just with you before you leave. So Antonio Panzeri, he's an Italian politician, a member of the European Parliament with Article 1 Democratic and Progressive Movement, which is also part of the Socialist Group. He's also a member of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and the Subcommittee on Human Rights. So he's going to talk to us in Italian, and you're going to have a translation in French. Thank you.
Grazie. Spero anche che il parlare in italiano non abbassi la qualità e il tono di questa discussione. Volevo ringraziare per l'invito che mi è stato rivolto. Offro qui molto velocemente e rapidamente il mio punto di vista sulla sinistra europea, perché la discussione che è stata proposta non è certamente semplice in un momento nel quale la sinistra europea appare investita da una profonda crisi e con difficoltà è alla ricerca di nuovi obiettivi e nuovi fondamenti culturali in grado di aprire un orizzonte di rinnovamento e di rilancio. Come già è stato detto, nelle recenti e meno recenti elezioni che si sono svolte in alcuni paesi europei, i partiti socialisti, socialdemocratici e progressisti sono stati pesantemente sconfitti e all'interno di essi le prospettive della sinistra appaiono assai problematiche. Si può dire che sembra essersi consumata una grande stagione che ha visto la socialdemocrazia europea protagonista della trasformazione e del governo delle nostre società. Eppure questo fenomeno si presenta oggi a noi non come un esito ragionevole di una vittoria della cultura liberista sulla tradizione socialista, ma al contrario con un sorprendente paradosso. La sinistra infatti arreta proprio nel momento in cui la grande crisi finanziaria, economica e sociale, iniziata una decina di anni fa, chiude il ciclo di una globalizzazione senza regole, dominata dall'ideologia ultraliberale, e tornano, come abbiamo visto, politiche diverse, politiche protezioniste. Tramonta l'illusione dogmatica dell'infallibilità del mercato, al centro del dibattito tornano idee fondamentali che sono proprie e care della tradizione socialista. Anzitutto la necessità che sia la politica e le istituzioni democratiche a orientare e regolare lo sviluppo economico, perché solo a questa condizione lo sviluppo capitalistico si concilia con i principi della democrazia, della giustizia sociale e della tutela delle libertà individuali. Si riscopre, ad esempio, che non è il denaro che produce denaro, così come ha voluto far credere l'oligarchia finanziaria dominante, ma è il lavoro che produce ricchezza e valore, come descrivevano i nostri classici. Il paradosso dunque qual è? Di fronte a questi enormi cambiamenti sembra proprio che il socialismo in Europa ad essere più in difficoltà e in gran parte del nostro continente governato da una leadership conservatrice il declino della destra neoliberista sembra non andare a vantaggio dei progressisti, ma in molti paesi europei va a vantaggio di una destra nazionalista e populista e talora di forze apertamente reazionarie e razziste. È giusto quindi chiedersi perché proprio qui nella vecchia Europa sembra essere così difficile la sfida per i progressisti. perché è proprio qui, in questa parte del mondo, che ha visto nei secoli scorsi l'affermazione più alta dei valori democratici, dei principi di giustizia sociale e delle libertà individuali. La storia, è vero, non si ripete mai allo stesso modo, tuttavia il rischio è che il nostro continente si avvii verso un declino non solo economico, ma anche politico, civile e culturale. Ricordo alcuni anni fa un acuto sociologo francese, Dominique Moisy, che descrisse il mondo diviso in 3 sentimenti: la speranza, che anima i grandi paesi che si affermano come protagonisti sulla scena mondiale, il rancore degli esclusi e dei perdenti e la paura dei più ricchi che temono di perdere i loro privilegi. L'Europa è per eccellenza il continente della paura. Il timore dell'aggressiva competitività delle economie asiatiche e oggi del protezionismo americano, la paura degli immigrati che sconvolgono la nostra organizzazione sociale e che soprattutto oggi, con la crisi e la disoccupazione, appaiono ai più poveri come un nemico e una minaccia, la paura del terrorismo, dell'Islam, che hanno accresciuto la sensazione di vivere in una fortezza assediata e il bisogno di ricollegarsi ad una identità civile, religiosa, forte e radicata. La destra ha fatto di queste paure la sua forza. La sinistra europea invece non è stata complessivamente in grado di fornire una risposta positiva alle sfide che la globalizzazione imponeva. I socialisti europei si sono divisi di fronte a questa sfida. In alcuni paesi e in alcuni partiti ha prevalso l'illusione che gli effetti della globalizzazione potessero essere contenuti e che si potesse difendere l'assetto sociale frutto del secolo socialdemocratico e del welfare state. Dall'altra parte vi sono stati partiti e leader che hanno invece cavalcato con entusiasmo il capitalismo globale, condizionando non poco il pensiero socialista continentale, senza essere in grado di porre rimedio alle disuguaglianze sociali crescenti generate dallo sviluppo senza regole del capitalismo globale e apparendo di fatto sostanzialmente nel solco di una cultura neoliberale e quindi coinvolti tra le forze responsabili della crisi di oggi. Il problema, ecco il punto, è che il socialismo europeo, sia nelle componenti più tradizionali, sia nei settori più innovativi, non è riuscito di fronte alla globalizzazione ad andare oltre all'orizzonte del riformismo nazionale. In particolare, questa è la mia opinione, la grande opportunità legata al processo di integrazione politica dell'Europa è stata colta solo in piccolissima parte. La sfida del mondo globale sta proprio nella capacità di governare i processi a livello sovranazionale. La crisi della sinistra avviene in questo contesto. La perdita di influenza viene certamente da lontano, si caratterizza in particolare per non essere più in grado di ridurre le disuguaglianze sociali. Del resto, con la caduta del muro di Berlino sono venute meno le forze politiche, non solo comuniste, e sindacali capaci di creare rapporti di forza utili a favorire una distribuzione più giusta della ricchezza prodotta. Inoltre, la globalizzazione ha fatto saltare il quadro di riferimento della sinistra europea, cioè lo Stato-nazione in cui si produce e si ridistribuisce la ricchezza. Diceva François Hollande all'inizio della sua campagna elettorale: il mio nemico è la finanza internazionale, per finire poi una volta all'Eliseo e senza poteri reali per agire con il rassegnarsi a formulare limitate proposte di tassazione internazionale. Come dire, il re è nudo e la sinistra, per così dire, prende freddo. La mia opinione è che infatti solo agendo, io sono d'accordo con Nadia Urbinati sulle sue suggestioni, solo agendo sul piano sovranazionale che si può immaginare di condizionare la globalizzazione, di fronteggiare sfide globali, immigrazione, tutela dell'ambiente, lotta alla corruzione. L'architettura europea è oggi la precondizione dell'azione politica e della sopravvivenza della sinistra. Senza un'Europa politica, ogni governo di sinistra, anche a livello nazionale, è condannato al fallimento perché non dispone più degli strumenti necessari, in primo luogo quelli economici, per mettere in atto le sue politiche. So di aver indicato in qualche modo una strada che non è per nulla semplice, ci vuole anche il tempo necessario. Tuttavia è mia opinione che sia l'unica prospettiva realistica per una sinistra rinnovata. E vi ringrazio per l'attenzione.
Ernesto. Simone is also an Italian politician, also from Article 1, Democratic and Progressive Movement. He also published a few books, one of which Nadia was referring to, the Parole Parlate, and he's going to talk to us in English.
I'd like to thank Caterina for having made this meeting possible, and I also would like to say as a premise that her work has an extraordinary value for both the scientific community and our political task, as Etienne Balibar confirmed yesterday. In this work, Caterina tried to answer to a question that is very important, that has been treated as object of her dissertation, and I would like to answer to this question, that is, what is the political space? And to use the fundamental dichotomy that also Caterina utilized in her dissertation to justify her argument, we may answer in this way. It is the theater of citizenship and public discourse, the border where the historical dynamic takes place, interpreted both as a space of appearance, as an immediate link between the prince and the people, and as a space of representation. Carlo Galli adopts this definition, and I think that also this definition is correct. It is the topological structure of being to which every political system or ideology is referred. And my personal opinion, that here I try to propose in very basic terms, is that we are living in a time where a process of crisis of modernity has reached full maturation, and the hermeneutical paradigms, languages, structures of thought, which have known in the past from the French Revolution on, are no longer sufficient. Marc Bloch spoke about the paradigm of civilization. I think that the peculiar form of European civilization that we have known until now is inside a crisis. And Paul Hazard, analyzing the passage in Europe between the end of the 17th century and the beginning of the 18th, introduced the category of the crisis of the European consciousness. I think we are now assisting at a new crisis of the European consciousness. In other terms, today, the political space is no longer a paradigm, becoming instead the possible result of a choice, a creative act, not just a simple act of a will, a prophecy, an anticipation, a prefiguration of an order to which, as a prescription, we decide to direct our choices. Carl Schmitt would have suggested to adopt an act of sovereignty within the state of exception. And it's a matter of choice, a difficult one, but still up to us. I was talking before with Anna Maria Merlo about this fact. We are seeing in some sector of the European left nationalist claims that worry us, and whose statement towards the migration crisis are relevant proof. They are not absolute novelties. It's not a case that in the final part of the work of Caterina, the migration and the borders debate gains a prominent role, placing itself at the core of the construction, obliteration and negation of the European political space. Also in the past, nationalist position have a place in our history. I want to remember that the Communist parties and the Third International were born in the proximity of the First World War against the choice of the vast majority of socialist parties to vote for the war credits, following the respective national bourgeoisie. I also see localism, regional identityism emerging in the left, even if they host some grain of truth, formulating a quest for truth. They present a wrong answer by identifying themselves as mere processes of egoistic separation from the wall in which they are inscribed, well beyond a perimeter of supranational solidarity. For us, and this is the central point, I completely agree with Antonio Panzeri from this point of view. Instead, the political space is Europe in its totality. in its multifaceted nature. Europe, which has been during the centuries many things together and at the same time nothing uniform and definitive, is, in my opinion, an idea, a cultural space in movement. It is a history deep-rooted into a composed but still precise identity. As Henri Pirenne said, the passage from the ancient world to the Middle Ages is the end of the Mediterranean civilization and the birth of a European one. The Middle Ages are the first act of European history. The end of the ancient world represented the emergence of Europe as a new area of civilization, and which are the character of this identity. Christianity, obviously, as a real shared idiom, as a constitutive value of an entire political space, but at the same time, an ethnical, linguistic, and cultural heterogeneity that remains the dominant trait, which crosses our common history. Christoph Pomian has written about Europe as a field of contrasting forces in order to indicate attention towards universalism within centrifugal forces that act in an equilibrium. In other terms, the most powerful roof of Europe is this one, implying the ambition to give birth to a unified political sovereignty. I am about to end my speech. I would like to say some words about what kind of European Union could be helpful to bridge the gap between what is now Europe and what it should be, what we want that the European Union be. A European Union that could realize three objectives. Firstly, to cope with a great democratic process aimed at redefining its constitutional order, so that the European people could vote for a constitution which guarantees a communitarian sovereignty with the complementary objective to reinforce the powers of a parliament possessing real legislative functions, democratically elected with European lists. Also, this process should aim to modifying the governance structure from the Commission to the European Central Bank, giving to the latter function very similar to those of the Federal Reserve or the Central Bank of Japan, allowing it to pursue expensive monetary policies not mediated by private players. Secondly, a radical change of economic and social policies, and with priority of that industrial one, is needed. We need a great redistributive policy based on public investments for employment, forms of welfare and wage protection, and even before, an industrial strategy to cope with the great innovations of technology and production, a communitarian and complementary one. And third, we need a common European foreign policy aimed at peace in a different asset from the one described by Macron. Only if Europe plays an autonomous role as pivot of a new multipolar system, it will have a future. Only if Europe starts to build economic and commercial strategies compatible with the new global role of Russia and China, it will have a future. As a consequence, for example, sanctions to Russia are no more acceptable. Only if Europe redefines the alliance of NATO, playing a role of mediation between the East and the United States, it will have a future. If Europe doesn't accept to become an autonomous player in the Middle East, the war between Israel and Iran, for example, will take place, dragging with it the whole world. This process, by the way, a change of a constitutional order, new policies, a prominent role of mediation in the geopolitical scenario, could only be, like as Panzeri said, successfully conducted if a renewed left that is cautious of both its historical role and the greatness of the challenges that must be faced will lead them. Of all of these, there is no trace. Deprived of a shared vocabulary, fragmented as we are between a relevant part of the European socialism, which has chosen to become the junior partner of liberals within the big coalition, and many litigious aggregates of the radical left. We should need, even in this case, the strength and the courage of a creative act aimed at redefining, with a common project of progressive transformation in Europe, the borders of political families in this continent, the strength, the courage, and perhaps the humility needed at the end of 30 years in which the left has lost because it was wrong, and it was wrong because it has lost. It has lost its horizon, its space, its goals, its places within this space. This is my speech in English, very difficult for me. And now I would like to tell you some words more in Italian, because I have a question for Nadia, for Etienne, for Antonio, for Luke, for Andrea, and for all of you. E la questione è questa, la domanda è questa. Io ho scritto un libro con Roberto Gramiccia che raccoglie 40 parole per descrivere la sinistra, quella che ha perso il vocabolario e che deve invece tornare a riconquistarlo. E la prima parola di questo vocabolario è la parola amore, l'ultima è la parola utopia. Sono marxista, ma vivo in una realtà, in una quotidianità che vede la sinistra perdere perché si è disinteressata della vita reale, quella fatta anche di passioni, sentimenti, utopie e fragilità. Al centro di quel vocabolario, nella 20ª parola che noi abbiamo scelto, c'è appunto questa parola, fragilità. Ripeto, io sono marxista, penso che in un modo di produzione capitalistico il conflitto fondamentale, la contraddizione fondamentale è tra chi vende e chi acquista forza lavoro. Ma dentro questo neoliberalismo, dentro questo capitalismo di tipo nuovo che si è imposto negli ultimi 30 anni, è vero o no che la fragilità è la caratteristica che più connota questo tempo e che ci fa essere così uniti nella solitudine che viviamo, tanto a livello sociale quanto a livello esistenziale? Quando Salvini, il capo della Lega Nord italiana, l'altro ieri dice in Italia ci sono 11 milioni di persone che utilizzano psicofarmaci e io sono il capo di un governo che restituirà speranza, fiducia e cura a queste fragilità, e la sinistra ride e la sinistra sfotte la capacità invece che Salvini ha avuto e dimostra di avere di cogliere il cuore della questione italiana ed europea, io penso che sia necessario ripartire da capo, e cioè fare in modo che la sinistra, con un vocabolario antico ma moderno, torni a fare la sinistra. Perché la sinistra cosa è stata nel passato glorioso che abbiamo alle spalle? Questa capacità di tenersi per mano, di essere elemento di cura collettivo, che riconosce le fragilità e le federa, no? Come Leopardi diceva, nella catena umana, nella umanità che trova nella sua fragilità un elemento di forza, da Berlinguer a Don Milani per rimanere in Italia. Ecco, io penso che questo sia l'obiettivo della sinistra, ovviamente a livello europeo, perché a livello nazionale non ce la caviamo e non ce la facciamo, però una sinistra che torni a fare la sinistra, che torni a ricostruire un rapporto tra la vita e la politica, al di fuori anche dell'astrattezza che spesso la contraddistingue, e una sinistra che abbia a cuore la ricostruzione di una identità, senza ideologia, parola vecchissima ma dimenticata, bandita persino dai nostri vocabolari. Noi non costruiremo niente di utile allo scopo di ricostruire questo progetto politico, questa realtà sociale che è stata per tanti decenni la sinistra. Io sono meno, e concludo, meno pessimista, perché provo con tanti di voi e tanti compagni, non soltanto in Italia, a lottare, non soltanto a pensare, e vedo che tra di noi, anche tra la nostra generazione, ci sono, diciamo così, semi ben piantati che hanno bisogno di riconoscersi come parte di una storia, di una tradizione che non ci abbandona, da cui non usciamo, ma anche che siano stimolati come protagonisti di un futuro che penso abbiamo il dovere di iniziare. Grazie.
Nadia, io lascerei rispondere te.
Ma non c'è tanto da dire, sono come non si fa a non essere. No, can I speak English?
Sure.
I am in agreement both with his position. Perhaps it's a question of generation or a generational issue. I think this this is a time in which reconstructing or refounding a left capable of aiming at becoming a leader kind of left and not simply a testimony of the ideas of the left, not simply a minority, a small group of people. Well, perhaps this requires time and a lot of energies and imagination, and young generations are perhaps more capable of seeing far away in the future than me, I don't know. But one thing I would like to understand, there are two missing words in this book, the word solidarity and the word equality. So I know that the issue of equality, the question of equality is very complex, is a relational kind of concept, it's not a substance. It can be used in different ways. I don't want to enter. And the question of solidarity, because solidarity is perhaps the most important ethical desire of war, not desire, but word and concept for the left, to have the sense of being capable of seeing humanity beyond a class, universality beyond the deep condition of specific suffering. So I don't understand why these two crucial words are out.
Okay. So as Nadia has to go, is there anyone from the audience who would like to address a question, especially to Nadia? In French, en français, en italien, in English? Or also any of the speakers? As she has to leave in about 10 minutes.
It's okay.
Just keep on. Or do you have anything else to add?
No, I mean, it's like after, I remember a beautiful movie in Italy by Nanni Moretti, no? After the Cineforum, after the movies, generally, the whole Communist Party used to ask, now discussion, and people were so pissed off.
So, I don't know, if someone wants to just break the ice, or we just keep on going.
So I think you should go on.
Yeah, I just keep on going.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to keep on staying with us, Luke. Yeah, please.
I think that we should address the economic issue more directly. I mean, in fact, our colleague and comrade Panzeri did that to large extent, to some extent. But we need more discussion about the economy, because if we're torn, if we're caught forever between the ideas of global liberalism on one side and protectionism on the other side, or especially national protectionism, we're lost. I mean, there's no place for a new socialism or a new left on either of those sides. Besides that, it has to be said that I believe, I mean, I will not go into any detail, but that the two poles are themselves extremely abstract, because as you said, I mean, I think Pierantonio, and I completely agree with you on that. This is not the moment of the triumph of pure neoliberalism. It's the moment of a backlash, or an internal, very strong internal reversal or contradiction. I mean, neither Trump and of course China emerges, has the possibility, which is in a sense a very clear indication of the fact that they potentially act as global hegemons or something like that, to defend free trade, etc., against the the protectionist tendencies of Trump. It was always like that in history, of course. But in fact, China is also not purely implementing, I would say, a liberal policy. Far from. And there are sectors and aspects. So it's a very abstract representation. And on the other side, of course, protectionism is
Everybody have to leave.
Yes, okay. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Nadia. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, so now we're going to address the same question, the existence of political space from the UK's perspective. So I would like Luke Cooper to intervene now. Luke is a senior lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University, and he's also the national convener of Another Europe is Possible. So please, Luke.
Thank you very much to Caterina for the invitation to come here and join this brilliant discussion. It's interesting to be asked to confront the question of European political space from the British perspective at the moment when Britain is trying to leave the European political space. But I will try to do that by arguing that Brexit isn't, and I don't think this is a controversial thing to say in this room, but I think it is controversial in some European capitals, that Brexit is not a British problem, it's actually a European problem, and that it's the forces that have generated Brexit in the UK are specific in some ways. So in some ways they reflect British colonial national imagination and history. Britain has never been a country that has a lot of support for European integration for those reasons. But on the other hand, the tipping point that was provided in the vote from a large exit vote to a decisive exit vote was nonetheless given by the same forces that are propelling the far right forward all across the European continent. So, and I think at the heart of this really, and I don't think yet the left in its totality has really got this right from my perspective, but the heart of it, I think, is how we deal with the dual crisis. On the one hand, the economic crisis of the Eurozone. Okay, Britain is not part of the Eurozone, and there was never really any expectation that it would join. However, the ideological effects of the Eurozone crisis were definitely felt in Britain, in the sense that the European Union lost its reputation for economic competency and cohesion, and that was a factor in the vote. And then at the same time, the refugee crisis. And again, I think that's a factor in the British vote too, on largely racist grounds that are familiar all across Europe. Some of you will know that Nigel Farage and the Brexit campaign 10 days before the vote happened had a national poster campaign where they showed images of migrants making the walk across European polities and said that this was a breaking point. And correctly at the time, a clear parallel was drawn to the imaginaries of Nazi Germany at the time and the posters that the Nazi Party used in the 1920s and 1930s. And for me, I think at the heart of these coming together of these two crises is a weak sense of moral obligation that the European Union has shown to its own citizen subjects of Greece and other economies, and to perhaps more so and more severely and more violently to the non-citizen subjects of the refugee crisis. And drawing those two things together, I think we can come to some conclusions about what Europe is and what we would like to be in the future, following on from Simone's remarks. Because clearly Europe is a political space of extraordinary cultural and political diversity. It has this intensely uneven political economic geography, and that complexity has rarely been acknowledged in federalist visions, whether they're from the left or from the right. You know, the classic from the left, the Ventatini Manifesto, say, as you will all be very familiar, or from the right, the Churchill Manifesto, the same period. I mean, they all had this geopolitical security, well, less so the Ventatini Manifesto, but they all had the sense that Europe could become a common, unified political space, that it was a state in the making. And so while the Ventatini Manifesto had, as we would share, this emancipatory vision, and Churchill had a geopolitical security vision, in a sense they both saw Europe as a state in the making, saw that as the aspiration. And I think it's better for us if we rethink that sense of Europe as a state in the making and say, well, maybe we should accept that this is a political space of many different interacting societies, and ask the question, well, how can these societies have peace and justice, and how can we create a more reduce the self-evident power disparity that exists between these societies and its neighbours, that weak sense of moral obligation that I mentioned. So I think, and here I follow from my colleague and comrade in the UK, Mary Cowdor's notion. I think she has a helpful claim here, because she says that, well, look, actually talk about the European Union as a new form of international or global governance, and ask how it might be compared not to this 19th century vision of a state in the making, of the American model, or so on and so forth, but actually as one of the more democratic international institutions that we have, that is unique because it's attempted to create a political link between, and a representative link between global governance democratically through the European Parliament and so on, and individual citizens, weak though that may be. And if we abandon it, and seen in those terms, its abandonment becomes much more worse or much more problematic, because a Europe that moves and resembles more and more a kind of IMF-like international institution is not one that we could accept or would be normatively desirable at all. So those are my intellectual assessment, if you like, of the situation. I agree completely with what Nadia was saying earlier, actually. I didn't want to ask her the question because I was about to speak, but now she's gone, so but there you are. But I agree completely with what she was saying when she was discussing the different ways that the European project can be imagined, and the way in which the far-right nationalists in Europe are promoting an idea of European identity. I've also read recently Viktor Orbán's, just one of his speeches, actually. He obviously, and the Hungarian government obviously want the world to see it because they've translated it into English and put it on the Hungarian government website, and it's his closing speech of his recent election campaign. And I have to say, perhaps naively, and considering myself someone who's fairly well informed about European politics and working in this area or whatever, I had also found it deeply shocking that this is a government that's formally a member of the European People's Party bloc in the European Parliament, i.e. the mainstream conservative bloc, because it is explicitly anti-Semitic, it is explicitly Islamophobic, but more than that, it actually resuscitates a blood and soil type fascist narrative, which is lifted directly from Nazi Germany. There's no question. So he presented 4 days before the vote, he presented the choice that the Hungarian people had as this great struggle that they were undertaking to save the Hungarian nation from Muslims and Jews, essentially. And in doing so, he also promoted an idea of European identity, which was based on Christian civility, essentially. And so it was deeply troubling, and it sounds as a warning to us on the progressive left that there are different ways to state the obvious, there are different ways and deeply reactionary ways that the project of Europe can be imagined. So then what are my practical conclusions? Well, here, I mean, I agree with what a number of colleagues have said, but I just want to say something about what another Europe is possible as an anti-Brexit campaign in the UK context is trying to do, because we get very frustrated by the lack of international awareness in the British debate. Even the term Brexit is a very weird British thing, because it's a way of turning an exit from the European Union into something which is just about Britain, as if it has no other international linkages or connections. And that is a word that was invented by the Leave campaign, by the way, during the referendum, but has become completely commonplace in everyday political vocabulary in the UK. And what we want to do to shift this debate, and this is an invitation and appeal for you to help us really, is to bring more voices from mainland Europe. I like to say mainland Europe. No one else in Britain ever says mainland Europe, but you know, as I consider myself European too. Bring to the island in northwestern Europe more political voices into our debate to raise the consciousness of our discussion on the left, because I'm afraid in the UK on the left there's very little engagement with the trans-European transformation political question, and that's not a recent problem, but you might have hoped with our new radical left leadership of the Labour Party that they would be more internationalist in their orientation than they are. And the more people and activists and intellectuals from the mainland European scene they engage with, for us the better, because I think that will have a very helpful transformative effect on our political debate and leading them to come to a more internationalist position, and just understanding what is at stake for the whole of Europe on this question, and not think of Brexit as a series of technical inventions, and where you have to, on the one hand, you're trying to align with the electoral geography and map in Britain. On the other hand, you're having this super complex negotiation with the EU about the space programme, about tariffs and trade and borders in Northern Ireland. But actually, to realise at stake here, there's a political question about the struggle against fascism in the whole of Europe. That's what it's really about. And, we've got people in our campaign who voted for Britain to leave Europe in 1975, consider themselves Eurosceptics, people like Anne Pettifor, the economist, for example, or Gary Young, the Guardian journalist. Now, they're no friends of the European Union, but what they realise is that fundamentally Brexit is about far-right politics, that it's about fascism, ultimately. I mean, I'm not saying that the whole Brexit campaign is fascist, but in terms of its significance for the rest of Europe, it's about the struggle against fascism. So in the autumn of this year, and as you're all invited, we're organising a trans-European conference in London, but we'd also be keen to take the conference and the initiative elsewhere as well, producing ideas around a manifesto for Europe, looking forward to the European elections, getting politicians and academics from elsewhere in Europe to Britain, probably at the LSE. So I will hopefully be able to keep you aware, and we can continue this conversation further.
Thank you. Yeah, it would obviously be lovely to organize another Agora on European political space in London or wherever in the UK. That would be, a great occasion, definitely. Okay, so last but not least, Andrea Pisavero. He's a neuroscientist and postdoctoral fellow at the University of Glasgow. He's also a member of the UK National Collective DM25, and he's also one of the main promoters of the Manifesto di Londra. Please, Andrea.
Thank you, Caterina. I don't have time to talk about all these things that I'm doing, but I would like to just try to bring the neuroscience perspective into the discussion, also because I can't rival the other speakers and what they've been talking about, so I try to find my niche. in the discussion and try to convince you that understanding a bit of neuroscience it's also helpful in our cause to try to build up this European political space that we are lacking. And of course, I'm going to also talk about DM, which is this organization which is trying to do something in the European political space directly. So it's a political movement which doesn't believe anymore in the national theater of politics and wants to fight a battle directly at the European level. But I need obviously to start by really paying tribute to the very reason we are here today, which is Caterina very timely PhD dissertation, which has established the philosophical root of this concept of political space, and which is important not only because it opens up a field of research, I hope, for her and for other researchers, but also because I think we really need to reflect to what it means to have a political space in order to fight a political battle. And the first point I want to raise today is that effectively a political space is a cognitive space more than a geographical space. So it exists in our brains and in our minds before existing in a physical sense. And it exists to the extent to which it is represented in the brains of all the political actors who want to act in that space. And by political actors, I don't mean just politicians. I mean that if you want to do a political campaign, if you are an activist, if you're a citizen that want to raise a petition, you need to imagine who are the people you want to do this thing with. So you need to know who are the other political inhabitants of this space. And I think one of the major problems that we're facing today is that for most people, there is no notion of European political space. So probably for us in this room there is, but for the vast majority of European people in all nation states, this isn't the case. So if we don't have this representation, we are facing a large problem because the battle is played at the national level, and that is the perfect theater for the right, the nationalistic right. The word, it goes without saying. It's their theater, it's their battle, they win it. So we need to do something, and particularly we need to do something from the left because we derive our force from democracy. So if there are enough people that understand that the theater for politics is the European one, we don't have the democratic force to win that battle. And this is what we are seeing in electoral terms in many European countries, where also the left is split between those that don't believe that European political space is a space worth fighting in. But how do we go about to create such representation? I want to very briefly outline a very recent piece of research which says that every social space is represented in our brain in the same neural structures which are actually represent this physical space. Okay, so we have, for instance, the hippocampus is this part of the brain where we have the memory of our physical travels in space. There was recently a paper showing that our social interactions are represented in the same neural structure. And this is important, I think, in a number of reasons. But the first one is that we need to think that our brains are limited, very limited in the resources they have. So we only have one hippocampus, and we can only use it at a certain time. So if we are thinking about politics at the national level, we are not doing that at the European level, right? So there is competition, and we need to impose our framing. We need to constrain the hippocampus of our electors to think about what we want them to think. So this is something we need to frame in the right way. And the other lesson for neuroscience I want to try to promote to you is that framing our questions is fundamental. There was a discussion with Duke on the mailing list of Another Europe is Possible, in which we were commenting a recent survey, a British survey, which was asking to the British people whether they would like to have a public vote on the deal between Europe and the United Kingdom at the end of the negotiation period, in which they could have an option to remain in Europe. And I think the result of that survey was that the vast majority, 45 to 39, was against a public vote on the deal. However, when they reframed the question asking whether they want to have a final say on the deal, which is basically the same thing, right? A public vote, a final say. The result was exactly the opposite, 45 to 36. So how we frame our questions can completely change the outcome. And the very reason why Brexit won in the first place was that it was framed in a horrible way, from my perspective. It was asking whether you want to leave everything as it is, to remain status quo, versus the possibility to leave, to break, to obtain a change, any sort of change. There was nothing about what kind of change it was, but it was the only change in offer. And why would you ask such question in a moment in which everybody wants a change? So clearly that was the wrong question to ask. And DM, which is, by the way, an organization that exists also outside the European Union, not just in the United Kingdom, which I still hope can perhaps find its way back to Europe, but also in Norway, in Turkey, many other European countries. Obviously, in Britain faces a huge problem to become a major political force because, as you can imagine, we don't have the space to fight our battle. Particularly because Britain is and we haven't mentioned this so far, and I think it's worth talking about it. Britain is probably the only country in Europe where the left is successful, and very much so in a very interesting and inspiring way. So we, as an organization, we cannot be against Jeremy Corbyn, obviously. He's the guy who has survived the left. But we want to move tangentially to that and to try to use the European election next year as the theater of our battle. Now, obviously, there is so Britain has Brexited, so we're not going to have European elections in Britain. Nevertheless, we want to use that occasion to try to reframe the question that the British people should ask itself, which is not whether to change or not, but what sort of relationship should the UK have with Europe? Because there has to be a relationship, even if it's not as close as it was before. And this was precisely what was not determined by the referendum, because the referendum was a blank mandate to do something which wasn't clear, and it isn't clear still now. And another point we want to do is we want to steal one word from the opponents. So the Brexit campaign talked a great length to the notion of taking back control. So to take back control from the European Union in that context. But this is a very powerful narrative that we need to make our own. And what does it mean for us to take back control? It means democratic control of the people over what's happening. And since the Brexit vote, there has been no democratic control whatsoever on the Brexit negotiation. So we need to demand democratic control of that, and we need to equate the take back control with the democratic issue. And the other point, and then I leave it to the discussion because it's kind of late, is that obviously European Union is not just a collection of states. It's a federation of states in which there are citizens. There is 500 million citizens. And we think that a major role, a powerful role, could be played by those percentage of citizens who live in another country. There are 14 million European citizens who live in a different European country. And to break the national bubble, you can imagine how powerful would have been, for instance, a Greek citizen sitting in the German parliament during the time of the debt crisis. How could have changed the narrative of that debate? And we need to have this occasion to break up the stereotype and to put new words and new discussion in the place where matters. And I'll finish with this suggestion. Luke and I have been arguing about this for some time. I believe that if we could manage to convince Jeremy Corbyn, basically, to ask for an extension of Article 50 and have European elections in Britain, that would be an incredible occasion to not only perhaps bring Britain back in Europe, but also to change the electoral and political discourse in Europe in May 2019, which is, by the way, I think the political battle we need to all focus on from now to the next May.
Okay, thanks everyone. if there is any question. Nessuna domanda o question en français, question in English. If there's none, obviously you can also talk later. So if I want to just say that we give you time and space, I would like again to just add some.
I've spoken too much.
We've spoken too much. So we have to focus a bit more on the economic level. A couple of minutes.
The economic and the political are never to be separated. This is irreversible. One of the typical, of course, it's not a failure, it's an absolutely deliberate project of the European Union as it exists now, which led me several times, as a matter of provocation, of course, to explain that there was an amazing symmetry in this respect between the Soviet Union and more generally the Soviet camp and the European Union today. But I've seen that others have also proposed that. What's his name? The Bulgarian. Yes, he's written a book that is very popular now. Kratchev or Kratsev. Ivan, leave that. Anyway, my reason was that I wanted to explain that the current European Union is ruled by the absolute dominance of an economic dogma, which is just as ideological as the Soviet was. But this is an appearance. I mean, not in your sense, but in the sense of Nilun. It's completely political. So there will never. So we were right to bring back the. Several of us did that. The constitutional dimensions, the key importance of reinventing politics, so to speak, and of course on left politics in Europe. But I just wanted to insist on state the obvious. I mean, I'm sure everybody agrees that there's no European political project which is not also a project of a different economic policy. Now, there are several ideas which are, of course, around, which are not uninteresting. And I'm sure. So when the economists leave a little bit their closed world, you know, and the question of protectionism is producing, I think, a few interesting ideas. Several people have explained that we are entering a neo-mercantilist era. And that is not uninteresting as an idea, because of course first of all, it's been the case several times in the history of political and economic theories that the allegedly absolutely dominant representation of the free market was challenged through a reference returning to the name or the idea of mercantilism. This is already what Keynes did in his time, but it cannot be repeated exactly in the same manner, because the notion of the borders do not work any longer in the same way, and we more or less know that everything at the global level is now governed by the way in which the division of labor is combined with so-called chaîne de marchandises, that is the way in which different stages in the production of the final product are distributed all over the world, using the fact that you can travel very easily. So probably the important idea is not to close the borders or set up protectionist policies, which are almost inevitably also linked to xenophobic and nationalist representations. Or perhaps Nadia is fully right, at the European level, a kind of European fascism or neo-fascism that is. But it's to and this is also what Pier Antonio was saying, it's to grant Europe as, you're right, also I believe something that is not a super state, but that nevertheless, because it will never be homogeneous and centralized in the same manner as a state, but which nevertheless must have a kind of common policy, common program, common influence, I would say, on world affairs. And that has to do, of course, with yes, with a strategy that is neither protectionist nor just abandonment to the free market. This is very difficult in Europe because one has to say that. I mean, in every country, in each and every country, you have multinationals or even firms which are not so big. Germany is the great example for that, for which the only imperative is win a position on the world market, independent of whatever happens to the European populations. And I believe that the passive resistance of Germany to any change in the current situation, which is going to be the big obstacle or one big obstacle to any new course, has to do, of course, with the fact that they used Europe essentially as a background for a policy of export. Sorry, I'm confused.
No. So if yeah, exactly. If there is no question, like 2 minutes in italiano or 2 minuti ciascuno.
Volevo dire questo, se ho capito bene, i due interventi inglesi, possiamo dire inglesi, lamentano due cose. Il fatto che non ci sia il dibattito europeo su Brexit e dall'altro che la sinistra, inglese, in qualche modo ha una scarsa penetrazione nel dibattito europeo, diciamo così. Non c'è da meravigliarsi, perché ormai Brexit è considerato un azzardo della storia di una classe dirigente idiota e non è ripetibile, cioè l'Europa non ha più paura di una nuova Brexit. Così come in parte ha spiegato anche Nadia Urbinati, il tentativo oggi della destra reazionaria è semplicemente quello di conquistare l'Europa, non di uscire dall'Europa, perché stare in Europa è molto più conveniente dal punto di vista economico e quindi per loro è importante. Per questa ragione è diventato poco interessante il dibattito su Brexit, perché non è reiterabile, diciamo così. La seconda ragione, in realtà credo che il Labour dovrebbe riflettere un po' di più, e credo la sinistra europea, perché in realtà nel dibattito su Brexit Corbyn si è dimesso dal dibattito e sostanzialmente ha accompagnato la decisione del referendum, quasi felice che in qualche modo l'esito fosse questo, al di là di alcune dichiarazioni retoriche. E ovviamente questo è un problema enorme, perché sottrae la possibilità non solo di recuperare Brexit, ma anche di recuperare un ragionamento Volevo solo dire questo. Infine, il professor Lei ha ragione quando pone la questione economica come questione centrale. Solo che purtroppo quello che succederà nei prossimi mesi rischia di essere qualcosa di davvero preoccupante, per cui anche le nostre attività oniriche rischiano di diventare... I socialisti europei stanno discutendo proprio in queste ore il nuovo regolamento sul... Questo cos'è? Ok, ho finito. Stanno discutendo il nuovo regolamento per giungere alla definizione dello Spitzenkandidat. del candidato come...
candidato,
sì. E,
ho sentito Moscovici
bravo,
è orrendo.
no, non solo hai sentito, ma pare che si stia orientando tutto per giungere a quella cosa che considero drammatica per tante ragioni. Prima perché Moscovici ormai rappresenta un partito qui in Francia quasi inesistente. In secondo è quello che ha gestito la politica economica europea e noi non possiamo presentarci a livello europeo dicendo questo è il...
orgoglioso.
È anche orgoglioso.
Spiega che ha salvato
Bravo.
Grecia, eccetera.
Quindi molti dei nostri ragionamenti rischiano di cadere come delle patate, diciamo così, su queste cose che possono essere decise. Però insomma c'è speranza.
La S minuscola, giusto?
Okay, so I would ask you and Andrea to answer quickly about 2 minutes each to the 2 questions he made. So first of all, the irreproducibility of another debate, like as the one of Brexit in other countries, and the second one, the position of the Labour Party. I don't know which of you first. You decide.
Well, I think that Brexit could be repeated quite quickly in quite a lot of countries if the electorate in those countries were given the freedom to vote on the question. I mean, and Macron has said this explicitly to the British media, for example, that he was very honest about it. He said if you give the French people a vote, then they probably would vote out. So I think that, yeah, I agree with you that there isn't a likelihood of such referenda happening in other European countries in the short term, but it depends on political alignment. But then we have to ask why that would be the case, and I think it's due to the extreme structural crisis and pressures that the European project faces in almost universally from one country to the other. So, secondly, on the position of the Labour Party, well, you tell me, because I'm not totally sure myself, but they do not want to be seen as opposing Brexit, so that's the first thing, and they support an agreement with the European Union that is probably a softer form of Brexit than the one that the Tory government wants, more or less. So they want a customs agreement with the European Union and join the customs union. They're more uncertain about the single market, which I think from a left-wing perspective is ultimately problematic because you're establishing a position that is freedom for commodities and physical commodities by joining the customs union, but without the regulatory protections for working people. And they have arguments for why they're uncertain about that, to do with state aid and things which I think are ultimately mistaken. But I think the most important thing to say from a political perspective is that Labour Party members and also Labour Party voters are overwhelmingly opposed to Brexit. And that's the contradiction that the leadership is trying to manage in some ways between wanting to appeal to a small minority of their voters that support Brexit and keeping their members happy.
Thanks. Andrea?
Yes, very quickly, I agree with everything Luca said. If there was a vote for Brexit in every other European country, particularly in Italy, we will lose it. The only difference is that the British ruling class was foolish enough to ask the question, and the Italian ruling class hasn't been foolish yet enough. But I think Antonio is right in saying that the lesson has gone through, and perhaps it's not surprising that the new yellow-green alliance that is ruling Italy, first thing they have done is that they have taken out of the contract the idea to suggest an exit from the euro, because they probably even, by talking or reading the news, they understand that getting out of Europe is way more complex it's not an easy task. It's absolutely complicated. About Labour, you gave a fair account. I think the problem is there is no electoral occasion with the British electoral system to suggest a reversal of Brexit for Labour, because in 76% of the constituency where Labour MPs are elected, the vote of the people was for Leave. And even a slim change of those voters would bring the seats to the Tories. So I think we have an electoral problem more than a political one, and Labour's ambiguity reflects that problem. And this is also why I think the European election would be a much better theater for a different conversation. Also because European citizens, which are 2 million, could vote, so it's 2 million vote more, which is not.
How are you going to have European lists now that the Parliament has rejected that idea?
So, European list, you mean for transnational?
The transnational.
We have to have DM lists in each and every one of the European countries, which is also quite challenging because it's not like the parties are giving their way to us, right? So we need to fight against. So in Greece, DM should stand against Syriza if we want to. So it's problematic in many ways. I personally disagree with the idea to have DM list in Greece, but that's my personal point.
We should, and that's why I don't follow Varoufakis on that.
No, but you should follow it in Italy because it's such a disaster that at least we have a European perspective. We can maybe join our forces of the left. And if there was a chance in Britain, DM could play a role in a European election. I'll stop here.
Okay, that's it. Simone, last one, please.
Let me say only one thing, that in Italy, for me, it's not so easy to say. Because I'm talking about Carlo Calenda, that is not a communist, but it has been the Minister of Economic Development in the Renzi and Gentiloni government. But some days ago, he declared that Italy has made a mistake following, I'm reading his statement, a dogmatic interpretation of the global chains of value, importing steel at the lower possible cost, produced, dumped in Asia, destroying in this way the steel industry in Europe. So c'è Moscovici, c'è un socialismo che guarda a destra e che è corresponsabile di quello che si è fatto, persino tra coloro i quali hanno diretto e gestito il neoliberalismo italiano ed europeo negli ultimi anni, c'è un barlume di consapevolezza. Sarebbe da dire meglio tardi che mai, no? Better late than never. Io penso che a fianco di quello, e parlo di Calenda per provocazione, perché evidentemente non è certo il più vicino e il più simpatetico con le nostre posizioni, ma c'è una parte del socialismo europeo che, come Panzeri bene sa, a questa deriva si sta opponendo, introducendo qua e là, anche sui temi economici, barlume di buon senso. E poi concludo, lasciatemi ancora dire che in questo bel incontro che abbiamo fatto, ma persino nel rapporto between Etienne and Caterina, there is in a sense the symbol of what we can hope for the future. In this political, intellectual and perhaps also human relationship, there is a symbol of what we can build in Europe and in the left, because you are two comrade that I would like ever to have on my part of struggle.
Thank you all. Merci à tutti e a tutti.
Adesso
Grazie.
devi distribuire la tesi a tutti.
Vai, te la regalo.
Quanto è grande?